Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm your host, Jordan Euclid, founding partner of Key Investment Partners. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Representative Shawn of the Illinois State Congress and John Donovan, a lobbyist for Dykema. In this conversation, Rep. Ford, Donovan, and I discuss how the government of Illinois has shaped their cannabis legislation. We start the conversation covering the structure of the Illinois General Assembly, including the challenges of passing meaningful reform. From there, we discuss the success of the state's cannabis legalization efforts and specifically the benefits of social equity initiatives. Next, we address the threat posed by unregulated hemp-derived products and emphasize the importance of consistent testing, taxation, and oversight. Looking ahead, we consider emerging reforms around psychedelics, hemp beverages, and delivery licenses with a focus on public health and equity. Please enjoy the episode. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm very excited today to be joined by Representative Shawn Ford of Illinois and John Donovan of Dykema. So thank you guys both so much for joining the podcast today.
Thanks, Jordan.
Jordan, thank you. You got a great name.
Thank you so much. So maybe just to kick it off, we could go around the horn and maybe starting with Representative Ford, if you guys wouldn't mind just providing some of your biographies for the listeners and how you ended up getting involved in Illinois politics.
I like that. I am State Rep Shawn Ford, and I've been in office since 2007. After running 3 times, I won on the 3rd time, beating a incumbent of, let's say, 14 years. And I was a teacher by profession and a real estate broker. And I independently ran against the Democratic Party and won. And now I'm serving my 10th term. Never been challenged as a Democrat in the state of Illinois. So this would be 20 years at the end of this term.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And John, how about you?
So interesting enough, I had the privilege of working for Representative Ford at the House of Representatives. So my background, Jordan, a little bit going back to my family. I'm the son of a chief of staff to 2 Chicago mayors. My father served as Richard J. Daley and Michael Blandik's chief of staff, and then he went on to be president of the Chicago Board of Trade for about 18 years. I ended up going to the University of Notre Dame, and like all young kids, I absolutely idolized my father. And when I went to Notre Dame, I thought I was going to end up in business and be a broker, and in the end, became a history major, U.S. history. And next thing you know, that led to law. And I was clerking at the appellate court, and the judge, who was a mentor of mine, used to make us read the law bulletin, and in the back there were these lawyer profiles. And one day, 2 lawyers that were profiled, I saw assistant counsel to the Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives. And I said, I'm going to do that. So I walked into the judge and I said, I'm going to Springfield. And I ended up meeting with the Speaker, and the Speaker made me a job offer. That was in 2012, right after passing the bar exam. And I moved to Springfield, and I worked 3 years for Representative Ford. And then after that, I went to the Cook County Sheriff's Office and handled all the legislative and political stuff for Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart. And again, continue to work with Rep. Ford, and he's been a sponsor on a bunch of our legislation. And eventually I left there, and then I ended up at Dykema now, and I do government relation regulatory work over at Dykema.
Fantastic. Well, really excited to have you both on to talk about how cannabis legislation has rolled out in Illinois and what your views are for how the industry will shape up in the state moving forward. Maybe just before we get into that, For folks who maybe aren't as familiar with how politics work at the state level, would you mind giving a little background on how the structure of the Illinois House of Representatives and Senate is set up and how bills are passed at the state level?
Jordan, that's a good question because I really wanted to talk about how things operate and how everyone in the process has a role. Um, the legislature has a role, and that would be in Springfield, we have 118 members in the House and 59 in the Senate. And both are co-equal branches. Of course, you have the governor's office as a co-equal branch of government as well. But many times we really just focus on the elected members. But when you think about the work that's being done in government, staff plays a major, major role in helping get legislation passed and laws become the law of the land. For instance, John here, say he worked in Springfield, which I'm gonna tell you, there's no law that actually passes without staff. But then you add John now as a in the business arena where he's a lobbyist. I guess you're a lobbyist, right, John? I don't know,
Yeah.
but I just see him as John, and I take his work serious, and I listen to him because he has a perspective. So you have the legislature, you have staff, and lobbyists. Lobbyists sometimes get a bad rap, like politicians sometimes get a bad rap, but lobbyists play a major, major role in helping get the message out about um, public policy. I mean, they do major research, they bring their perspective, and good lobbyists like John will tell you their perspective and let you know how they see it. And then there would be people that would be that may think different than John, and they will come to you with their perspective and why it's important to see it their way. And as a member of the General Assembly, you have to take both along with the staff and leadership and decide what's best with your constituents mainly in mind.
Mhm.
So it's a really great process, and if it's done right, we get good public policy.
That's great.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I'd have to agree with that. You know, lobbyists get a bad rap, but they play an important role to it, just like staff. And I think the one thing that Rep. Ford really said was important there is good lobbyists will not only tell you their side and the side they're representing, but they will tell you truthfully the arguments of the other side as well, and they'll lay out a very clear picture, both sides of an issue, so that a member can make an informed decision. So that's why it's an important role. It's impossible for, Rep. Ford here to read every
Right.
single piece of legislation that comes there and be an expert in every single area of the code. And so that's where you rely very heavily on staff and the lobbyists that are out there to kind of, and the advocates to help you explain issues and understand them.
Yeah.
And you know what, Jordan? I think that both sides, regardless to the issue, both sides are right in their perspective because they advocate for who they work for and what will be good for them. So
Mhm.
it doesn't make it bad. It doesn't always make it right, but you need balance. And that's why you have proponents and opponents to come forward to make sure that you have balance in public policies. And that's why you have Republicans and Democrats both all working together to do what's best for Illinois.
Yep, that's fantastic. So, talking about some of those laws that have been passed in recent years, obviously, cannabis has been a major change for the state. Illinois was one of the first with a large population to legalize adult use cannabis. So, I'd love just to get any high level thoughts both of you have on how you've seen the industry develop in Illinois from medical legalization back in 2013 to recreational legalization in 2019 to today.
Yeah, I think that Illinois did the right, um, made the right moves as far as regulating cannabis. I mean, it clearly was bad public policy to have a prohibition because it cost taxpayers billions of dollars to not have regulations because you had the incarceration that really cost taxpayers money to incarcerate people for the possession of cannabis. Then you also had the untested market where you have the illicit market and the street traditional market selling cannabis where people really had no idea of what they were buying. And with fentanyl being so available and being laced in lots of things, it makes sense that one, we clean it up, test it, and label it for public health reasons. So I think that the fact that we are limiting the people that we charge with cannabis possessions has helped Illinois taxpayers save money, and we could use the money that's used for incarceration and court costs to actually use for education, health care reasons, and also destroying lives and communities. So Illinois, by legalizing it, taxing it, and regulating it, I think that lives are being improved because we're no longer putting felonies on people that will follow them for the rest of their lives and sometimes make them unemployable, leaving them as a tax liability and burden on taxpayers because they can't find jobs.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
John, do you have, yeah.
yeah, just to piggyback a little bit on that is I think the cost to Illinois is kind of twofold. Is when before it was regulated, you not only were losing the revenue that you're making now off of it as a market, but to Rep. Ford's point, you also had the societal cost that you then were bearing and paying for. And I know Rep. Ford has worked on a lot of legislation with the sheriff's office, and when I worked there, that was one of the things that we saw a lot of times. The largest population that we saw at the Cook County Jail for the longest time consisted of folks who had low-level offenses, mental illness, and petty drug offenses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that at least now you're seeing a shift away from those folks making up the population totals, and that in turn is a large cost shift. So there's really the two costs that you saw: the loss of revenue that the state was missing out on, and then the societal cost that it was picking up because of all the harms it costed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the places that Illinois has been seen as a leader in the industry, right, as it relates to restorative justice and social equity provisions and new licenses on that front. So maybe that's a good place to take the conversation next. Would love to get everyone's thoughts on how the social equity program has worked so far. My understanding is that there were 35 dispensary licenses issued in 2024, in May, rather, 2024 for social equity applicants. So would love to hear how that program has been working, any successes, any opportunities for improvement going forward.
Yeah,
I'm going to defer to Rep. Ford on this one. I'll let him take the lead.
we're going to talk about that because too, John, but I think that moving forward, I think before we, I just need to say and double down and highlight and uplift what John said about the revenue that we bring in. I think that cannabis has brought in as much or more in revenue for the state of Illinois as liquor.
Wow.
So, I mean, he's absolutely right that the revenue that it has brought in that we had missed out on for decades and decades has now become a source of revenue for our budget.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point about Illinois' social equity and rollout, it definitely was a process that wasn't perfect. And we're lucky to have had a administration that realized that it wasn't perfect in the long run, and we worked to improve it, and we continue to work to improve it because it's my goal, and I believe it's the majority of Illinois' legislature and the governor's goal is to make our cannabis law more perfect so
Mm-hmm.
that we can realize the full intent of the law. And we're working on that all the time with advocates and and business owners in the industry. But I'll tell you, some of the challenges are there's a lot of money being made in this industry, and it's a cash only business where you could only thrive if you have cash money. And
Hmm.
so it makes it very, very difficult for social equity and people that are without cash money, like millions of dollars, to grow their business and to stand their business up to compete with some of the major competitors in the industry. So it's my hope that we do everything in this country to try to get the federal government to legalize it at a level so that individuals and their businesses could borrow money from the financial industry to compete better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's a great point. Go ahead, John.
no, I was just gonna say, I think that's been one of the hardest things. I think,
Hmm.
Illinois is a great place. It's great in all things, not just cannabis. It's my opinion, it's the greatest state to come do business in the country. Um, but the difficulty, I think that and so with cannabis, what's great is you have a state and you've got legislature and governor and even a lot of municipalities all willing to try and work and make this a program that not only works now, but continues to work in the future and is as successful. I think the biggest difficulty is, and maybe it just wasn't anticipated at the outset, is to Rep. Ford's point, is really being able to get capital for some of the social
Yeah.
equity folks who started up. And, a lot of folks got licenses, but didn't have the ability to get, the means to get off the ground and running. And then that left you with, folks who were holding a license, but what value did it have if they couldn't use it? And so then they were forced to look to kind of sell it. And you're at this point, and it's not just in Illinois and other states, you're at this point where it's kind of this merger, and people are looking at, do I stay in this and try to make it work, or do I get
Hmm.
out? And I think that's probably the hardest part. And some of that is in Illinois' fault, to Rep. Ford's point.
Yeah.
With the federal landscape, it's hard for folks to access traditional means of capital. So I think that, capital, you probably know this very well, Jordan.
Hmm.
Capital is, is one of the hardest things for people to get and get off the ground running.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Great points. I mean, this is an issue we see endemic for the cannabis industry across the board, right? Where you have an industry that's taxed on gross profit. So it's already extremely difficult to make a profit. And then you have the fact that because of the federal illegality of it, a lot of traditional investors won't put money behind it. And then you add the component of if you're a social equity licensee and you come from a community that's been disadvantaged by the war on drugs, or you've been incarcerated because of cannabis historically, it's also going to be extra hard to raise the capital. So that's definitely one of the things that we've been pushing for in DC to get changes to say, hey guys, we really need to be able to raise capital and make this a real industry, because in the meantime, we're just seeing continued competition from illicit growers who are able to completely undercut the legal market because they're not paying any of those taxes or regulatory costs.
Jordan, I would tell you that this is a very, very competitive industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so people would, with the cash money, I don't think, and this may not come as any surprise to anyone, but if I have a company, I'm not interested in seeing competition. And so I think that there are some real major fights out there to um, keep the competition down. And
Mm-hmm.
that means that when you try to pass legislation to support social equity, there's going to be opposition. And I don't think that the people that got into this industry understood that this was a competitive market and that it wasn't a playground, and people were going to go out there and they were going to be competitive and do everything to dominate. And so we have to do everything that we can in government to support the small people, to support the small individuals and the small companies so that they could at least have an opportunity to compete. Because in the real world, without government intervention, it's going to be hard for small companies to compete against big cannabis companies with all of the money and power.
Absolutely. So as we think about competition, a few years ago, I believe it was end of 2018, the new farm bill was passed. And that created a new set of competitors for the cannabis industry that a lot of folks weren't necessarily seeing coming. And what a lot of folks realized was that you can grow hemp and then extract the intoxicating cannabinoids out of it. And now you have hemp derived intoxicating products. I would love to get your thoughts, Rep. Ford, on how you see the hemp industry going forward. I know you've introduced a new bill about that in this congressional session, so I'd love to get your thoughts there.
You know, this takes us back to the prohibition of cannabis. I mean, do we want to have another prohibition that we know harmed the communities, that harmed families, that cost taxpayers billions of dollars in court fees and filled our jails and made people unemployable? It's a product that's there, and if we are not able to magically make it disappear from the face of the earth, then we need to treat it as Delta 9 cannabis and tax it, regulate it, test it, and make sure that it's safe and no longer causing the harms like Delta um, 9 did in our country. We learned from Delta 9 cannabis. We should take the lessons that we learned from Delta 9 and apply it to Delta 8. And as John said, it brings in billions of dollars of revenue. We need to collect it, and we need to protect the public safety, health by testing it and labeling it so that people know what they have. All the while doing everything that we can to eliminate the illicit market out there. Because regardless to what we do, if we do nothing, the illicit market grows. If we tax it, regulate it, then we create opportunities, business opportunities for people to have a legitimate business and hire people and employ people and grow our revenue in our state. So I'm all for treating Delta 8 hemp products like we treated Delta 9 cannabis products.
I
Makes
think,
sense.
Jordan, it should we take one step back. Actually, I think that we were talking about social equity with the cannabis program. I think the hemp cannabis fight actually puts us kind of face to face with the social equity question as a policy issue here in Illinois, because for every critique of social equity underneath the cannabis program, you look at hemp, and there are Black and brown business owners in the hemp space who their safest, most successful route to get into the market because of the barriers to entry due to cost and capitalization is through hemp right now. And there's a thriving industry that they've built, I'm sure everywhere in the country, but I'm speaking just for Illinois, across, our county. And if all of a sudden tomorrow, those businesses were turned off, you're really calling the question of how equitable a program and your regulatory scheme is in the state for business. And so I think that's a big philosophical question that Rep. Ford's trying to answer and the legislature has to deal with. I know the Black Caucus is concerned about it. And I think ultimately in the end, where we end up is, as Rep. Ford was saying, is with a regulatory scheme that tries to make sure, everybody has an ability to operate, but they're all being subject to the same things for safety and consumer protection, while not putting folks out of business who've built businesses on both sides of the fence.
And that's what John is saying. Actually, um, you know, I think that cannabis industry sees this as competition, and they're pushing very hard to ban hemp delta products for the very reason that John has outlined here, saying that it's a way for people without cash to get into this industry and make money. And so the cannabis industry sees this, Delta 9 sees this as competition that they want to crush and they want to eliminate it. If you look across the country, like in California, I think that the cannabis industry is pushing the governor to make permanent his hemp delta executive order because they believe that it threatens their viability and their success. So that's what's happening across the country. No different here in Illinois, where the cannabis industry is saying ban it because we played by the Illinois rules, and we should not allow this product to exist after we've done everything that the government has asked us to do. We've invested millions and millions of dollars to become legal. And now you have this competitor that has less regulations, right now, no regulations. And even if we decide to regulate it, they believe that it still would not add up to what it took for them to become a legal entity in the state. So I think that it's going to be up to the community and good government to do everything that it can to not start a new prohibition, but to make sure that we regulate this Delta 8 products for the good of the community.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And making sure that all the product is tested and doesn't have any harmful additives is, I think, also critically important there.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, definitely making sure it doesn't have anything, any of the things that kind of get into it. That's definitely critical. I know Rep Ford knows this. When I was at the sheriff's office, that was something when we were initially looking at the issue from the consumer protection standpoint. That was a real big factor, making sure that's the same type of testing, same type of packaging and labeling. So you don't have the Sour Patch Candy looking brands. It's something that is very, conspicuous to a parent or a child that, hey, this is, a hemp or cannabis derived product.
Absolutely. Yep. Now, I wanted to ask you both about the Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program, which directs 25% of cannabis tax revenues to communities that were harmed by the war on drugs. And I believe that in 2022, there's 45 million awarded across 148 programs. Not sure what the latest is on that program, but would love to get your guys' thoughts on how you've seen it develop.
That's been great. I mean, to actually have revenue go back into communities that were harmed from the cannabis industry is a win. It's like a revenue that's not taxed on items like food or gas or things like that. It's almost a luxury tax because people, for the most part, that buy cannabis, they buy it and it's a luxury for them to buy it, and they pay a heavy tax in Illinois. The good thing is if it's a medical purchase, then they are exempt from taxes. So this is a luxury that people have, and they are supporting the communities that have actually been hit by the war on drugs. And what's happening now, they go out and they go into the communities and they deal with harm reduction. They deal with workforce people that have been impacted by felonies from a cannabis conviction or any other conviction that may have been added to their record. And they help them get their records sealed. That's one of my greatest achievements in the legislature that John helped me with years ago, is to get felony records sealed to give people an opportunity to have hope. And we carry that over in our cannabis law, where they're able to get them expunged. But, so that Restore Fund, R3 money, is good for helping with the repairs that were the harms that were done from the war on drugs.
Yeah, I mean, and it really is. It's a great thing. I mean, 25% of the tax revenue goes to it. The 5 priority areas that it focuses on, and Ford laid most of them out, are absolutely critical. And I think one of the best thing about it is, unlike other grant programs, it places a strong focus on getting at the organizations that are really the boots on the ground. They themselves from the community, working in that community with the people from that community. And again, like a lot of things, access to capital is everything. These are groups that may not otherwise get, large sums of money or sums of money, and they have this opportunity. And I think I was reading, in advance of us talking today, and when they first launched it, I went all the way back just to see what the inaugural report said. When they first launched it, one of the things they single out very early on is the enthusiasm in the community when they first sent out the notices for it. It was just overwhelming. And then I saw a stat that said there was, I think, 56 out of the 102 counties have an R3 zone in it. And
Wow.
that's half the state. So that's a large swath of area that's getting the benefits of this program. So I think it's great in that sense that it's doing that.
Absolutely. And as you guys talk about the tax revenue that's generated from the industry, one of the questions that we're always curious about from the legislator perspective is, how do you think about the trade-off between tax rate and total tax revenue generated, right? Rep. Ford mentioned that Illinois sales state tax on cannabis is high. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that because it's a Schedule I substance, at the federal level, cannabis is taxed on gross profit, not on operating income. So how do we think about, maximizing total tax revenue by making sure the taxes aren't so burdensome that it forces people to go back to the illicit market?
I'm going to let Rep. Ford take this one because most people who know me, I am a Democrat, but I'm a low tax Democrat. So I have my own personal opinion on the tax rate for cannabis. And I think the answer obviously also depends on if you are the purchaser or if you are the state getting it. But I'll let Rep. Ford answer this one.
That really dovetail right into our question about R3. And so it's a real benefit to the R3 program that you're able to collect that revenue and turn it into grants for the community. But I've been working with the industry and the cannabis industry, and there is a report that's been issued that stated that if we lower the taxes, that we may have an opportunity to collect more revenue in Illinois from more sales because it will prevent people from crossing the border where the taxes are lower. It will also help people make a choice to not use the underground or the traditional market, the illicit market, and go into the dispensaries because it is a lower tax rate. So I think, like anything, we should make the right decisions from facts and data. And so if the truth is that a lower tax rate will actually generate more revenue and eliminate the illicit market faster, then that should be our approach. Government should not be done whimsically, it should be done right. And so the beginning, we actually put that rate on there, and there has been a lot of studies done. And I think that we need to pay attention to what we know now and reconsider whether we should keep the rate or lower the rate. I have that as my perspective. And so I'll open it up.
Well, I think one thing I'll add, I think one of the issues with the taxes in Illinois is how they're layered, right? Under our law, when you purchase, you get the state tax, you get the county and the municipal tax all layered on top of it. And I think that's one problem there because everyone's trying to get a piece of the pie, and you can only bleed a turnip so many ways. And I'm the turnip in this scenario. And so I think that's one issue where you look at it. If you're asking me what I like best, I tend to like the local municipalities getting the revenue even more than the state because they're the one-to-one connection with the community where it's at. And so, I know a town just over from where I live, I want to say from when they got their first dispensaries open to, up to today, they've replaced all their police cruisers with the money. Things like that are great because a town's not going to be able to raise taxes to do those things, and this allows them to. So if I had to adjust it, I'd rather the local government be able to take more of the tax, and I'd rather the state get less. But I know the governor wouldn't like hearing that. I know a lot of the members of the General Assembly would like hearing that. And in the end, that's what it comes down to: is everybody wants to be able to get a piece of it. And I think that's what makes it harder. I'm a firm believer. If you lower the tax, people will buy more. It's just, when you go in right now, I forgot the last time I looked, but if you buy an ounce, by time you're done with all the taxes, you could have bought another half ounce. So that's what you're losing in the value. And I think somebody would, buy that. There's other things too that Illinois could look at. There's issuing new licenses, allow, I know the one thing when back when I had the medicinal bill in November 2012, letting people grow their own plants. You can't get clones in Illinois. So there's a bunch of other things I think creatively the state could look at too, as means of making up the lost revenue, or offsetting if they were to lower the taxes and not losing revenue.
You see how John actually brought in the part about local government. That wasn't high top of mind for me, but it's true that local governments have been fighting to get a greater share. And guess what, Jordan? They're saying if we legalize and regulate Delta 8, that they want to make sure that we be fair as it relates to the share to local governments for the revenue that's collected. And I think that, John has been working on the local distributor fund. This could be one way to make sure that we increase the local distributor fund and not take it from the general revenue.
Yeah. Could you talk some more about what is the local distributed fund?
The local distributor fund is the revenue that the state gives to municipalities to, as a share of our revenue in the state. They want more revenue coming from the state to support local governments. And right now, we're not using the funds from the cannabis. We use tax revenue that's collected across the state to support local governments.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you can imagine why they want it from the state, because then they don't have to raise the local taxes if the state's giving them money, and that's never a politically wise thing to be doing. So
yeah, makes total sense. And I know the cannabis operators and consumers in Illinois will be excited to hear that there's consideration to bringing down the tax rates. Now, with regards to governance in the industry, Illinois has set up both a cannabis oversight commission for industry folks, and then also within government, there's been an Illinois House Democrats cannabis working group set up. So I'd love to hear how both of those advisory organizations have been conducting business so far, and any learnings from those groups.
I was chair of the cannabis work group, but that didn't go over so well. Let me just say, because there is a lot of tension in this industry where you have the MSOs, the social equity, and you have the hemp industry. And it is such a new budding industry where I think that everything still has to be talked about. And when you put together work groups, you pretty much know that you have almost consensus on what direction we might want to go. We just need to figure out how we're going to do it. But there is almost very little consensus because the MSOs, the multi-state operators, are dominating. And then you have the social equity. So multi-state operators have their contingent of supporters. Then you have, and these people are strong. They are strong supporters, and they actually stand their ground. Then you have social equity that really like many people in the state. They believe that things should be fair, and they're fighting, but they don't have the funds to fight and the power to fight for it the way the multi-state operators do. And then you have the hemp industry trying to fight to get in. So there's just a lot of confusion that actually makes it difficult to get things done. And guess what? It's not just in Illinois. It's industry across this country that it's hard to figure out.
It is.
Yeah, I was going to say, you layer in with, you filed your bill, Representative, and then all of a sudden we had the federal elections happen, and that sort of changed the politics behind the impetus here to do something. People were able to sort of say, well, wait a minute, let's wait and see who's going to get a better deal if the
That's
federal
exactly
government
what
first.
they said. Yeah.
And then most people don't understand this too in Illinois. So I don't know if every other state has it. In Illinois, we have I think the most units of local government out of any state, but we also have home rule units. So there's also this weird dichotomy where, they could fight the battle out at Chicago City Council and have it in a smaller little area, or at the Cook County Board or one of the county boards, and try to get a patchwork of things. So with all, I think you used the word confusion, with all those layers of confusion and chaos out there, it's sort of why things sort of just kind of went to a standstill at the end.
Yeah, and
Last year.
the speaker and the president, it's so divisive that it divides our caucus, and that's harmful for getting other policy items done because we're actually fighting family, and that's unfortunate.
That is
Yeah,
unfortunate.
right down to the city. I think one of the few wins that Mayor Johnson had in our legislature was the day they were able to kind of hold things up there when they sent his legislative team down that day. So I mean, it's not just divisive in the caucus; it's divisive throughout those whole layers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we covered a lot going on in cannabis regulations, and if there's anything I missed, please feel free to add that. But then more broadly, would love to just hear your guys' perspective on any non-cannabis related regulatory reforms that are front and center of your guys' mind going forward in the next year or so that you think the listener should be aware of.
Well, I think doing everything that we can to improve the cannabis law, like for social equity, that's got to be top of mind, making sure that social equity has in Illinois the ability to bring in investors because they can't borrow money from the traditional financial institutions. So in Illinois right now, if you are a conditional license holder, you can't bring investors because the law that we have in Illinois says that you can't. And so we need to amend the law so that people that have conditional licenses will be able to bring in investors to help grow their business. The other part that we need to do is make sure that medical patients have the ability to buy their cannabis at any dispensary. When John did the medical cannabis, it was at the time the only place where you could buy cannabis, and the only reason to buy it was for medical reasons. Right now, it has been regulated, and in Illinois, medical patients can only go to those same dispensaries. We need to open it up and allow for medical patients to go to any dispensary in the state and receive the same tax break. I think those are very big amendments to the cannabis law that we should consider.
Absolutely.
I Let's see, my rundown. Well, I was hoping Rep Ford, because I'm sitting at, I just told you I landed here in Denver for the Psychedelic Science Conference. So I was hoping Rep Ford was going to plug his Illinois Cure Act legislation dealing with psychedelics. The other one, just speaking to some of the other members' bills that are pending, is Leader Cunningham, the Senate has legislation to deal with THC and hemp beverages. I think that's an important one. I'd like to see some of that. I'm a little biased. Having done the liquor legislation in Illinois when I was on staff, and having done the craft brewers legislation when we first passed it, I'm very intrigued in seeing that, because I know that they'll try to follow that a little bit. And I think that's, everyone's kind of looking towards it, with liquor focusing on it, and liquor sales going down, and the shift over there. I think it's going to be an important one, and for Illinois, it's a big revenue thing too. And then I know Rep Harper has hospitality licenses, which I think is a very interesting area to see, in consumption lounges, things like that, and delivery licenses. That's another one that I think that we don't have that in Illinois right now, and I know that would be a huge thing here. So those are all some little odds and ends around those areas that I think are important. Rep Ford, if I can, what are your thoughts on the psychedelics legislation?
Oh my goodness, I believe in it so much. And you know what, when I learned about psychedelics, it's more liked and more acceptable, believe it or not, than cannabis.
Hmm.
When I talk to people across the state and the country about psychedelics, there's no opposition. I'm
Wow.
telling you, I mean, there may be some opposition, but the opposition is it has to be done right.
Mhm.
But overall, even when I talk to lobbyists from the pharmaceutical, they want it. People will privately tell me, "Oh, I wish you all the best at getting this done because it helps so many people in my family. In fact, it's helping me." And athletes, professional athletes that John and I work with from the Blackhawks and other organizations, they want this to happen. So I think that like cannabis, and this is why the multi-state operators and the cannabis money strong people want to maintain dominance in it until we're able to get some money push to help advocate and lobby for the regulations of psychedelics. It's going to be tough.
Mhm.
But that's because it's going to take more education and it's going to take a lot of work to put together good public policy where you're going to have think tanks and you're going to be able to have it flushed out well. So I see some form of psychedelics becoming legal in a few years because there's a love for it and a need for it. It's not we got to continue to dispel the myths about psychedelics, and that's been the problem, the LSD and people responding to what they read about many decades ago
Mhm.
when it wasn't regulated and people using it like they should not have used it. Our goal is to regulate it for medical purposes only in
Mhm.
Illinois
Mhm.
and be under the care of a therapist while administering it and not leaving until the therapy is over.
Mhm.
So it will be safe and it will be a prescription that will not be bought off the shelves like cannabis, but it will be under a therapeutic session.
Mhm.
And I think that the fact that we know people are using it now unregulated makes it more wise to rein it in and regulate it.
Yep. Yep. That makes total sense. And I can say from experience in Colorado, I think that they've taken a great leap forward in terms of legalizing plant medicines. And John, I'm excited you're here this week for the MAPS conference. Hopefully you'll have some good takeaways to bring back
We're
to
looking
Illinois
forward
as
to it.
well. Yeah,
They're looking forward to it, definitely.
amazing. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much
Oh,
for the
no, not
time.
so fast. Are y'all taking a trip anywhere? Is there going to be? You don't have to answer that.
Yeah.
You can tell me later if you took a trip, and I'll love to hear how the trip went.
Absolutely.
We'll let you know.
All right.
Yeah.
Jordan, thank you very much for having us. I really appreciate it. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. In terms of like contact information, or if folks want to learn more about Representative Ford, your platform, or reach out to you, John, if folks have any ideas to work with Dykema, where can they reach y'all?
Uh, you can shoot me an email, JDONOVAN at Dykema, DYKEMA.com. And then on the website, you can find us.
Yep.
Great.
And thank you, John, for connecting me to Jordan. This has been a great discussion, and I wish you all the best with your podcast. And my website is LaShawnFord.com, and my email address is repford@LaShawnFord.com. And I look forward to continuing dialogue with you, Jordan.
Great. Thank you so much. I look forward to
Let's
that
do
as
that,
well.
Rep.
All right.
All right. See
Thanks,
you guys.
gentlemen.